I'm delighted to give the Wilmer Memorial Lecture for this year, and thank you for the opportunity. In order to introduce my interest in this topic of the history of the global reach of Wilmer, I thought I would digress for a moment and share a personal story. In the 1980s, I was a young epidemiologist with the United States Agency for International Development, working in the Philippines with local collaborators on a project examining the population prevalence of hepatitis B and its sources of transmission. I loved working in the field on big public health problems that had international ramifications. In 1983, Al Summer came to stay with us in Manila as he scouted possible sites for a vitamin A project. After several late night discussions, he offered me a position at Wilmer with the Dana Center for Preventive Ophthalmology. I protested, saying I had no background at all in ophthalmology. Al replied that knowledge of public health principles and a passion for problems of global importance is more important, and that I could learn ophthalmology on the job. The Wilmer Institute promised a career in global health with a focus in ophthalmology, and to my credit, I recognized the fantastic opportunity. I joined Wilmer sight unseen and never looked back. Wilmer's reputation and opportunities on a global stage made it a very unique place. And as I reflected back, I wondered how long Wilmer had positioned itself as involved in issues of global ophthalmology. Turns out, since its inception. The Wilmer Institute was dedicated in 1929 under the direction of William Holland Wilmer. The three great tenets of Johns Hopkins were part of that dedication. That is, excellence in clinical practice, research, and training. The dedication at the time noted that, quote, the Institute has been planned to make it a source for the direction of ophthalmologic thought in America. Well, despite that nationalistic statement, even in these early days, we find evidence of a broader international focus in each of those three critical areas. For example, training of future leaders in global ophthalmology has long been a tradition at Wilmer, and a few examples will suffice. Here you see an image of Dr. Eugene Chan, a fellow with Dr. Wilmer back in the 1930s, who went on to establish the first university-affiliated hospital in China. He is considered the father of modern Chinese ophthalmology. Another excellent example is that of Dr. Ali Asghar Kotadust, shown here when he was a fellow with Dr. Momani in the early 1960s. Dr. Kotadust returned to Iran and was a noted specialist in corneal transplantation. In his honor, the Kotadust rejection line is named. He developed an exchange program between his institution in Iran and Wilmer that offered Wilmer residents an opportunity to come to Iran as part of their training. No doubt many of the faculty remember spending time in Iran under the aegis of that program. A clear example of training future leaders is epitomized by Dr. Wandu Alamayu, here receiving the Macallan Award for his work in trachoma. Dr. Alamayu trained with Dr. Alfred Summer as a public health ophthalmology fellow in the 1990s. Dr. Alamayu is recognized as a leader in Ethiopia of the fight against avoidable blindness and is one of their top ophthalmologists. In addition to training international leaders in ophthalmology, the Wilmer Institute was also recognized internationally as a center of clinical excellence and long attracted patients from around the globe who came to be treated for routine and unusual eye conditions. I'm sure many clinicians can recall their own famous international patients, and I show an example starting with Dr. Wilmer himself in a portrait taken with the King of Siam. Clinical excellence attracted notables such as President Nixon, a patient of Dr. Momani, and President George Bush, shown here with Dr. Morton Goldberg. Wilmer's international reputation for clinical excellence is what attracted the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to seek out Dr. McDonnell and establish a collaboration for training, clinical care, as well as research between the King Khalid Eye Hospital, and the Wilmer Eye Institute. While many of us who participated in that collaboration perhaps look back with mixed feelings, there is no question that Wilmer was tapped because of its international reputation. The reputation of clinical excellence was critical in the establishment of wide international interest in global ophthalmology, and the founder of that vision must be considered to be Dr. Edward Momeny, the third director of the Wilmer Eye Institute. He is a monumental figure in the creation of global or public health ophthalmology. And those of you in attendance at the 57th meeting of the Wilmer Resident Association heard Al Sommer and Carl Kupfer of the NEI speak of Ed's influence and legacy in the international arena. I'm going to share just a few stories to illustrate his influence on the international stage and how he changed the Wilmer Institute to achieve international focus in not just training in clinical excellence, but research as well. In the 1960s, there was interest among many scientists of establishing an institute devoted to eye disease within the National Institutes of Health. However, such an initiative needed an endorsement by a scientific body, and no ophthalmology organization at the time, not AAO or the precursor to ARVO, would endorse such an institute. So one was created, the Association of University Professors of Ophthalmology, whose first president was Dr. Momeny. And AUPO became the scientific organization that would endorse the creation of NEI. This was signed into law in 1968. 3 years later, in 71, Dr. Momeny was the president of the American Academy of Ophthalmology. As part of his presidency, he led the session on international blindness prevention, the first session of that kind for that organization. But I want to address two other large initiatives of his that put ophthalmology squarely into the global health arena. In the early 1970s, largely disjointed efforts by several disparate organizations had resulted in programs and advocacy efforts to address problems of visual loss that often suffered from lack of coordination. Sir John Wilson, shown here on the left, a blind scientist and activist in issues of blindness worldwide, met with Dr. Momeny at a meeting in Jerusalem to discuss solutions to this issue. Out of this meeting came several action plans. Sir John subsequently lobbied intensively, and in 1974, the World Health Organization declared the need for a single international agency that would unite all the different groups working in global blindness towards a set of common goals. A year later, these organizations, including NEI, came together cooperatively to form the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, whose president was Sir John Wilson, and to no surprise, the vice president was Dr. Momeny. A year after that, under their leadership, the World Health Assembly adopted a resolution requesting action against the problem of blindness and the establishment of initiatives against the leading causes of vision loss in the world at that time: cataract, trachoma, onchocerciasis, glaucoma, and vitamin A deficiency. By 1978, with funds secured from IAPB, the WHO inaugurated a program for the prevention of blindness within their headquarters based in Geneva. These organizations, the Program on Blindness and IAPB, guaranteed a highly visible place for ophthalmology on a global scale, in large part due to Dr. Momeny's efforts. His vision was inspirational to others, both as a call to service and to further realize the needs of global ophthalmology. One of those inspired to service was Dr. David Payton, shown here in the picture with Dr. Kotadust. Besides being the first medical director at King Khalid Eye Hospital, Dr. Payton went on to become the founder and medical director of Project Orbis. As many of you know, Project Orbis was initially a specially outfitted airplane that served as a flying eye hospital and training centers for the country it served. Project Orbis is now more than a plane-based program, with several land-based projects on blindness prevention. In addition to inspiring others, Dr. Momini himself had a vision for research and training in global ophthalmology and public health that would be based at Wilmer. To this end, he tapped another one of his notable residents, Dr. Alfred Sommer. By the early 1970s, when Al was a resident, he had already been an EIS officer for the CDC and was posted at the Cholera Research Lab in Bangladesh and completed his Master's of Health Science and Epidemiology at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Momini felt Al was the perfect person to take on the development of a center at Wilmer for public health ophthalmology research addressing the major blinding diseases. Al, however, left Wilmer for Indonesia to become the first director of a nutritional blindness and prevention project looking at vitamin A and corneal disease. It took Dr. Arnold Patz, fourth director of the Institute, to convince Al to return as the director for the Dana Center, along with the associate director, Dr. Hugh Taylor. The Dana Center had a twofold mission: to carry out research using public health principles on initiative against the major blinding eye diseases as described by WHO. Secondly, to train the next generation of leaders in public health ophthalmology. The Dana Center training program provided an MPH based on classes at the School of Public Health, as well as a set of intensive classes and projects within the Dana Center. The training program continued the inclusion of international luminaries as first seen under Dr. Wilmer. Besides Dr. Alumni, this picture depicts a graduate, Dr. Petya Vasilieva from Bulgaria, who went on to become a director of an institute and one of the leading ophthalmologists in her country. The Dana Center was, and still is, the only US-based WHO collaborating center in blindness prevention. Clearly, though, the research program brought Wilmer to new heights on the global stage. And I think it's important to share how monumental the contributions to the global burden of disease have been made by members of Wilmer through the Dana Center. In onchocerciasis, clinical trials established ivermectin as the drug to treat microfilaria using community-based approaches. And this research was the basis for changing the World Health Organization program on river blindness. Onco is now a very infrequent cause of blindness worldwide, with several countries having eliminated the disease or at least the blinding sequelae. The vitamin A story is well known. Clinical trials established vitamin A deficiency as not only the cause of keratomalacia, but also as a significant cause of child death. Studies done in Indonesia, Nepal, and elsewhere formed the basis for the current UNICEF program of provision of vitamin A to reduce child mortality. Trachoma. Research conducted by Dana Center members have informed all aspects of the WHO SAFE strategy for trachoma elimination, SAF&E. Clinical trials identified simple antibiotic use to avoid postoperative trichiasis, or the S component. Trials validated the use of azithromycin in communities and whole districts, mass drug administration to decrease infection, the A component. Trials in communities found augmenting facial cleanliness and aspects of environmental change, the F and E, were important to decrease trachoma sustainably. Studies throughout Latin America, Africa, and Asia. In cataract, population-based research identified inequities in surgical coverage, quantified the increased risk from smoking and UV light exposure, and identified cataract as an indicator of the risk of early mortality. Under the leadership of the second director of the Dana Center, Dr. Harry Quigley, an international focus turned to glaucoma. He worked with international colleagues to develop a glaucoma classification system. He conducted the first survey of glaucoma in an African population and provided some of the first estimates of the global burden of glaucoma. Under the leadership of the third director, Dr. David Friedman, Studies in China and Singapore focused on some of the unique issues around angle closure glaucoma and its treatment. Well, I've talked about the history, but let's now turn to the prospects of the future of Wilmer on the global stage. And it appears bright with promise. Certainly, it continues its presence in clinical and training excellence, and research in the future is indeed bright. Take faculty like Dr. El-Maghraby, working on emerging diseases and particularly Ebola-associated eye disease in Africa. Dr. Maraf Wole, currently working on modeling trachoma elimination and the likely estimates for the ongoing need after elimination for trichiasis surgery worldwide. Dr. Megan Collins, who is looking at school-based solutions to health, particularly addressing the global problem of refractive error. She is currently part of a UN World Bank consortium on the global tracker for the impact of COVID in education. Indeed, the legacy of Wilmer on the global stage is long and proud, with collaborations and support for the next generation and their interest in underserved populations, in technology to advance care worldwide, and research that impacts global ophthalmology. I have every confidence that this legacy will continue to enhance Wilmer's presence on the world stage. Thank you for your attention.